Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Sorry. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming. This is an excellent turnout. Very excited to see everyone here. My name is Will Rooney. I'm an undergraduate senior and a coordinator of the Duke Catholic Center's lecture series. For any of you who may be new or here for the first time, the Duke Catholic Center's lecture series is a programming feature of the Duke Catholic Center, which is a Roman Catholic parish serving the Duke community. And tonight we are blessed to be addressing Thomas Aquinas and his proofs, his philosophical proofs for God. The general theme of the lecture series really is to complement students' curricular studies. And tonight's really an excellent example of that. Certainly at Duke we don't have too many opportunities to take courses looking at the philosophy of God and what we actually are talking about and what we're referring to when we speak of God. And tonight we're really excited to be able to address that, specifically within the tradition of St. Thomas Aquinas. So before I introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Fulvio de Blasi, I should begin with a word of prayer from St. Thomas Aquinas. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Whatever is pleasing to you, O merciful God, may I ardently desire, wisely pursue, truly recognize, and bring to perfect completion to the praise and glory of your name. Order my life, O God. Grant me to know what you would have me do, and to carry it out as I should and as is profitable for my soul. Grant that I may never falter, whether in prosperity or adversity, so that I may not be puffed up in one nor downcast in the other. Let me rejoice over nothing except what leads to you, nor grieve except over what leads me away from you. Let me never desire to please or fear to displease anyone but you, O Lord my God, who live and reign forever and ever. Amen. Amen. Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So, indeed, to our very distinguished speaker, Dr. Fulvio de Blasi, this event in particular is a collaboration between the Duke Catholic Center and the Thomas International Center, which is a Catholic think tank based in Raleigh, with also a campus in Italy. Dr. Fulvio de Blasi is an internationally renowned scholar in the field of applied philosophy and business ethics. He earned his PhD in philosophy of law from the University of Palermo, Italy, and he is the founder and president of the Thomas International Project and the co-director of the Thomas International Center in Raleigh, North Carolina. He has also taught at the University of Notre Dame, the LUMSA Law School, and the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome. So we're very blessed to have a real scholar and authority on St. Thomas Aquinas and philosophy of God here this evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Will. Well, thank you all for coming. Aquinas is definitely, as an author, my best friend. My scholarship is mostly on Aristotle and Aquinas, as far as authors are concerned. And this is a fascinating subject. Who is God? The title was chosen by Will, so I'm obeying. But I'm really glad to obey. It's a great topic. And there are two main ways to approach the issue. One is theological and one is philosophical. And my approach today is going to be philosophical. Philosophically speaking, we know God is the creator. We know God as the creator of everything, which involves a lot of interesting knowledge about God. For reasons that I'm going to spell out, hopefully, during the talk. We know him as a person, philosophically. We know him as present here in this world with us. We know him as a loving being, too. I mean, some people think that that God as a loving being is only a theological, sort of advancement in the history of ideas. It's not. God as a loving being is also a philosophical notion. So I hope to be able to show something, at least a glimpse, about these things today. Theologically speaking, what is really new in our faith are two things. Which ones? I mean, quickly. Can you help me with that? What is really new about who is God in our faith? Try me.
Incarnation.
Right, and?
Holy Spirit.
1/3 of it. The Trinity, right? So what are the most important mysteries of the faith? The Trinity, and the incarnation of Christ, right? So these two, as far as who is God goes, are the two main advancements, in a sense, in our understanding of God. But everything else is pretty much philosophical, achievable through our reason alone. So, and as you may know, Aquinas is very well known as a guy who tried to put together all the previous knowledge from other philosophers and theologians, even pagan philosophers coming way before Christ. So he's a sort of, his work is a sort of synthesis of previous human intellectual achievements. In doing that, he has also been very creative, but he was very humble. So sometimes he has great new insights, and he speaks as if they were already common knowledge at his time from his predecessors. And one of these syntheses, very famous, is the place in his work in which he talks about the so-called 5 ways to reach the existence of God, philosophically. So these 5 ways are very famous because Aquinas, working on previous philosophers, put together what, to his understanding, was the main way for our mind to reach the existence of God. And he synthesized them in 5 possible ways. The first is probably the most famous in the history of philosophy because it was the first one developed in history by Aristotle. It's the so-called proof of the unmoved mover. I'm sure you heard about it. And then there is a second grounded on the concept of efficient causality. The third, I might ask you about, is about contingent causality. The fourth is the most metaphysically difficult to understand. But for some reasons, which might be a big part of our talk today, it might be even the most insightful for us tonight, is the so-called way of the participation. And I'm not going to explain what it is right now, maybe later. The fifth is one of the most fascinating in the history of philosophy, is the way grounded on finality, on natural teleology, to use the more technical term. You know, teleology, you know what it means in English, right? Teleology is, you know, it's a funny thing. You cannot really understand what it means in English if you don't know some Greek, because it's a Greek term, really. It comes from 2 words in Greek, telos and logos. Telos means end, and logos is a much more nuanced word. You might know logos because St. John at the beginning of the Gospel talks about logos as Jesus Christ. And the Book of Wisdom talks about the Word of God creating as an architect everything. So technically this word logos means the word of our intellect, is the voice of our intellect. So logos is not just the intellect, it's the intellect speaking, moving, walking. So it's a rational discussion about the end of things. This is what teleology means. Every time you see logos at the end of a word in English or in other contemporary Western languages, it means a rational discussion by way of discovering something. In the Bible, when Jesus is the logos, it means that he is the action of God. It's God creating, God doing something in this world. So, and in the image of the Trinity, he would be exactly the Father generating through logos something. So it's like if you think about yourself is an idea, right? It's an idea generated by your mind. What's the difference between you and yourself? Yourself is an idea, is right here. Is my knowledge of myself. But it's an idea. I'm real. The idea is just something floating around my mind, right? So myself is generated by my mind in knowing me. So it's like the Father knowing himself generates a perfect image of himself. And the connection between the two would be the Holy Spirit. This is one of the traditional ways to get a glimpse of what's going on in the Trinity. But anyway, this is just to understand the term teleology. I use this also to push you to study some classical languages, to work on etymology. Sometimes we don't really know who we are unless we go back to the roots of our civilization, even through language. So these are the, I just listed the 5 ways. But what is more important than focusing on just one of them is to understand how they work, because especially in the contemporary world, sometimes it seems silly even to the idea that we can reach the existence of God. I mean, some contemporary scientists try to explain that maybe the Big Bang Theory will just put God away, or that, there are all these silly ideas in contemporary science. And forgive me if I call them silly, but from my viewpoint they are. I mean, I hope that some of these will be self-evident from what we are going to see tonight. We need to get really deep into at least a few philosophical concepts here, because otherwise we will never get what Aquinas was trying to do with the 5 ways to prove the existence of God. First of all, let me ask, by the way, is some of you studying philosophy? Anybody? Okay, we have at least one. Okay, what's your name?
Mike.
Mike. Okay, Mike. Give me something that you think exists. Anything. Oh, come on. Something much easier for us tonight.
This chair that I'm sitting on.
Okay, the chair. Perfect example. Prove to me that it exists.
So you can argue it from kind of perception of it.
Mm-hmm. Just prove it to me.
Prove it to you?
Yeah.
Well, what's a chair and what is existing?
What chair? What chair? Which one?
This object that I'm sitting on.
Are you sitting on an object? Prove it.
How about I prove oxygen?
Truly, is there a way in which you can prove that that chair exists? Seriously, any of you? Have you ever thought about this? Can you prove that whatever you have in front of you right now exists? What would be the only way to prove me that that chair exists? Showing it to me, right? If I don't see it, how can you prove that it exists? You can talk about chair the whole day, but talking about chair doesn't make one chair exist. Does it make sense? Think about it. Can you think of a chair that does not exist? Try me. Does Harry Potter exist? Please don't say yes. Does Harry Potter exist? Does he?
Well, the idea or the character of Harry Potter.
Right, the idea. Does Harry Potter exist?
No, not as a person.
Not as a real object, right? It's an idea, right? It exists as an idea. Where is it? Where would be existing Harry Potter, really? In the mind, first, the Rowling first, and every other reader of Harry Potter later, right? The owner would be the Rowling's mind, right? She could say that, no, that's not the true Harry Potter. This other one is the right one, right? She's the only one because she created Harry Potter. But the point is that you can think of something that does not exist. Is it illogical to think of a chair that does not exist? There's nothing illogical about it, right? Why? Why it's not illogical? I know, I want to try your minds tonight. You need to learn how to think about these things. It's not illogical because the concept of chair, the little thing you have floating in your mind when you think, does not require the existence of the chair. So the concept of a chair, what the chair is, that you can describe in many books. He could talk about the chair while I was, standing the opposite side, saying a lot of interesting things about the chair, even describing exactly the concept of a chair and the specific nuances of that chair. This can be written down. There's nothing illogical about it. It's perfectly logical. But the existence is something different. you can describe what it is without the chair really existing, and you can have it in your mind. It's not illogical. Yes?
I feel like there's like a limitation there, though. So what if you had no idea that a chairs even existed?
Mm-hmm.
So you were like one individual knowing that chairs do not exist. But does that then disqualify the fact that chairs exist? Right? Because like if you don't know,
It might not exist, right? Does the unicorn exist? You know that for many years people thought that the unicorn did exist, right? How did you find out? There was no unicorn, right? But still, many people thought it was existing. They went looking for the unicorn. Maybe Bigfoot exists, right? Maybe not. What's the only way in which you can check if something really exists? You find a unicorn, you find Harry Potter here, I mean, with the wand, or not, or not. So, yes, Mike, you have it.
I was going to say that if you look at like contemporary philosophy, this idea of like existence has also kind of been expanded.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to say exist in like modern philosophical terms, there's all these ways of existing, but I think the existing that we're talking about is being in the world.
It is definitely the only thing you need to know right now about existence is that it's definitely, if it exists, it doesn't exist as an idea in your mind, which is one way of existing, right? The unicorn exists in our minds. So, and this is important because if you think about, oh, my computer shut down, okay. If you think about everything, if you close your eyes and think of everything you have in your mind, everything you can talk about, I mean, what's the real difference between just being in your mind and being outside your mind? Is the existence, the real existence. So again, this is an important point because the existence of anything, follow me really carefully here, cannot be deduced by your concepts. I cannot deduce the existence of something. Either I have it here, or I can just talk about it my entire life. I can talk about witches and witchcraft and unicorns. They don't exist because I talk about them. I don't deduce the existence. Why? Because it doesn't belong to the essence, to the concept. Essence/concept, same thing. The definition of something. You can define things, and this very definition, what they are, doesn't include the existence of the thing. So, essence/definition and existence are two different things which belong to what? To what we have in front of us. We know existence of things only because of direct experience, through our senses. So we know what does exist as opposed to what does not exist, to the unicorn, because of our senses, of the way in which we can prove them through our senses, but not because we just reason about it. Because our reasoning may start with the idea of a unicorn. So you can deduce whatever you want from the unicorn. So, but it doesn't follow that it exists.
What about things like justice?
That's definitely not a real object. It would be a quality of the person, so we don't have to get that far. So, but you said rightly, what about the idea of justice? It exists in us. If it exists, it's not an object. It's a relation between people. For example, I owe you $10 because I bought this book from you, right? So there's something due from me to you, right? This $10. But it's a relation. It's not like you can find an object which is the right. It's something between me and you. It's an advanced knowledge, but for our purposes right now, it's definitely not an object outside ourselves. So why am I beginning this way? Because it's really important for us to understand that when we want to prove that something exists, there is only one way to do that. We have to start from something else that does exist. And from that existence, we can reach another existence. So there are two things that we can know as existing. Either the things that follow immediately below, in front of our senses, we can touch, we prove that they exist. I can see your chair, so I know it exists, that chair, not just the concept of a chair. Or I might wonder whether something that exists requires to exist something else, which is what we usually do, right? When we reason about reality, when we do science. So let's talk about some things that we can reach. And they might exist or they might not. For example, the atom. The atom, have you ever seen an atom? I haven't. Nobody has ever seen an atom, right? But it might exist. If it exists, it's because from something that exists, we try to get deeper into what is required for its existence. We notice something in our lab, something, maybe a light or something that does have implications. And by implications, we say, if this exists, something else should exist, or must exist, or may exist. If we are not sure, we can make hypotheses, right? But the existence is in the premise, it's not just in our mind, it's not in the essence of something. And now, this concept is important because when we approach the possibility of demonstrating or proving that God exists, we need to understand that since we don't see God is not like that chair. I mean, can you see God right now? I mean, is it here? Can you actually double check because you see God? I mean, none of us can touch or see God. Not even if you were living 2,000 years ago, because Jesus was appearing as a man, not as God. So in order to see him as God, we should have gone a step forward. So can we see God? No, of course not. So how can we start any kind of reasoning to reach the existence of God? Only we can reach that as a conclusion if and only if what does exist in front of us requires as a cause God's existence. So it's pretty much what we do with the atoms. So it's not different. You know, there are two ways, explains Aquinas, in which we can prove something. He calls one way in Latin propter quid. It means that because of something, something else follows. So, you know, he says the effect through the cause. You know how something works, so you can deduce how the effect is going to follow. So you have a perfect knowledge of your dog, and you know what your dog can do. You know your dog because it's in front of you, so you can study the dog, and you know what the dog can do. You know how some big elements work, and you can do some weather prediction. Do you know the future when you know weather prediction? What do you know? You know the present, right? Can you know the future? I'm intrigued by this question. Can you know the future? She says yes. I mean, do you agree with her? Can you know the future? Mm-hmm.
I think there are like ways, like, I mean, we're humans, so we're not omniscient like God is. But I think there
No,
are
we as humans, we are talking about as philosophers right now. So can we know the future?
No, I think we can like find ways to make.
But
certain
when we do
events
weather
probable.
prediction, right?
Right. So like predicting weather,
Uh,
it's like using deductive and inductive reasoning.
Yeah, but predicting, isn't it knowing the future? If tomorrow is going to rain and I know it, isn't it the knowledge of the future? How come?
Because if you're predicting something, there's still the
What
probability.
the question is, what is it that you know? If you don't know the future, what is it that you know in the present?
You know, events that might transpire.
No, you know the cause. You know how the cause is inclined to produce something. That's what you know. And to use Aquinas' own words, which I wrote it somewhere, let me see. To know the future in its cause is nothing other than to know the present inclination of the cause to its effect. Properly speaking, then, it is not knowledge of the future, but of the present, is Aquinas. So, which is totally reasonable. So what we know is the cause of something. We understand how the cause is working, and we see that the cause is inclined to produce something. So we know that inclination right now of that cause. We can say tomorrow this cause is going to do this, but I know the present, not the future. by extension, I can say that I know the future, but it's not that I'm knowing the future, I'm knowing the present, right? But I know the cause, and through the cause I know the effect. But there's another way to know things, to prove things, which goes from the effect to the cause. So I know, for example, some lights in my lab, and out of some very complicated processes, I can deduce that those lights involve the existence of a very small particle, which I call electron, whatever. But I need to see something, because if I don't see something, there is no way I can deduce the existence of something else. Because, again, the existence only comes from the existence, not from an idea. Your ideas, what are your ideas? Your ideas are abstract, right? This is what they are. They don't have flesh and blood. They are abstract. That's why they don't have the real thing. Otherwise, our head should be huge, right? Everything should be inside it. But we have just abstract ideas. But the real thing is out there and should exist. So, for example, again, the atom, the black hole, I mean, everything that requires a process in which we start from something we see and we try to deduce what is required for its existence. So if we can prove that God exists, is only if there is something right here with us that we can see as lecture which requires the existence of God. But it's not that simple, because this may be already a big mistake that too many people made in the history of philosophy. We don't really know God's existence, and this is big part of the reasons why Aquinas called them ways to know the existence of God. Think about it. When you know something through its effects, you don't really know what it is. I mean, truly, we don't know the atom. The atom may be a bunch of different things. Maybe we are just seeing the atom's ear right now, or the eye, and we just call it the atom. Maybe tomorrow we are going to see the whole thing, and we will laugh at ourselves, saying, wow, I mean, it was much bigger than I thought. We are just seeing this little piece right now. Maybe the string theory is right. If the string theory is right, the atom is just a little part of a bigger thing, right? Which involves waves and particles and all these things, right? The point is that if I'm scientific in my reasoning and I only know the effect, for example, I see a football moving. I can tell you that if the football is moving, there is something that caused this movement. Was it a dog, a football player, my little sister? Who did it? Was it a cannonball? I mean, something mechanic that threw the ball in the air? Truly, I can tell you that that the ball is not able to move itself that way, that something else moved the ball, but I don't know what it is. So when I give it a name, let's call it atom, this name is not what it is what I'm calling it. So I should say, to be very scientific, right now what I'm calling atom, bless you, which, by the way, is just the cause of this lights effect in my lab, exists. But I cannot say the atom exists. I should say what I call the atom exists. Because really what I'm observing is a very limited thing, which is the effect of something that might be bigger, huge, with a lot of different properties. So the very important feature of this way to know something through reasoning is that when we know the cause through the effects, we don't really know what the cause is in itself. We can say something about the cause, for example, that it's able to cause movement, physical movement, but nothing more than that, right? So again, what you can say about the cause is what you see in the effect, because the cause, insofar as it's causing an effect, it is similar to that effect. For example, if I see a Ferrari, and I'm an alien from outer space, right? And I see this beautiful Ferrari, and I dig into it, I see how it works and what it does. I see something, this effect. What is it? It's very rational. It's intelligible. It's not able to explain itself. So I can deduce that there is somebody with freedom who built the Ferrari. I don't have to make this deduction if I see just even a very nice object erupted by a volcano, because that may be just a random thing that it does appear to me with some kind of logic, because I put this logic into it. But the Ferrari is way too sophisticated to be erupted by a volcano. So if I find a spaceship and I'm from the Earth, I can do the same deduction. So if I have the spaceship, extraterrestrial life exists. What is it? Is a big lizard? Is an ant? Is whatever it is? I don't know. I know something. It should be intelligent, pretty smart, because the effect reveals a high-level mind that built it according to design, according to a geometry and the function. It needs to be an agent that can visualize something according to a rational scheme, and then who wants to execute it. So it needs to be a free agent. It's not definitely something that can come out of necessity. So again, keep this in mind. Technically speaking, I don't know even if I can know God, the existence of God, starting with the existence of the universe I have around me. Still, I don't know God in himself. I know only what resembles God in its effect in this earth. So Aquinas would say that at the end of each of the 5 ways would see, and this is what we call God. It doesn't say this is God. That would be a huge philosophical mistake. We cannot deduce, and this is God, because truly we don't see God in himself. But we can say this feature here is what we call extraterrestrial life. This aspect of rationality in the Ferrari is what we call human action, which human means rational, intelligent, and free action, right? This is all we can do. But then if this being looks like an elephant or like a different thing, we don't know, right? We cannot make that deduction. We cannot step too much forward in it. So again, it's more what we don't know at the end of the day than what we know. Assuming that we know that actually God is the one who kicked the football, right? What do we know about God, really? Nothing. I mean, we can say, sure, God kicked the football, and then what? I mean, who is God? It's very little. But still, there is a lot we can say. But at the end of the day, it's so little that we don't really know God in himself. But I'm trying to be very logical here. So I'm telling you, God, the proofs, so-called proofs for the existence of God, they don't prove the existence of God in a sense. They prove the existence of what we call God, which doesn't mean that he's not God. It just means that what we see about him is so little that we cannot say God, this label has to be customized according to our understanding. Keep this analogy in mind. And this is the atom. We cannot say that. The atom might be way more complicated. This is the black hole. Come on, what do we know about black hole, really? Even if they may not even exist. But if they exist, what do we know about them? We know so little that if you are a really good scientist, you should always say, this is what I'm calling black hole, which, by the way, is so small that who knows? Big Bang, I mean, if I'm a very good scientist, I should never talk as if I really knew these monsters. Monsters in the sense that they may be so complex in reality. We know something which might be relevant, but is still very small. But logically speaking, is about what we call than about what it is. But this is the process. So we know 2 important things at this point. We know that in order to prove that something like God exists, we need to follow that procedure that starts from something that exists as an effect in front of us, and from that something, see if God actually is required by its existence. Let's go a little bit, let's move forward. Let's talk about the kind of causality we are talking about. There are 2 kinds of causality. One is really silly even to think about it in this context, but amazingly enough is the one that you will find in most of the discussion in science today. Because many scientists would try to make you believe, because they believe it themselves. I mean, they are not very good trained metaphysicians, so they really believe that that's true. They think that they are going back in time, maybe to the Big Bang, and they find something that shows that at that time it was not God who actually made it happen. It was a Big Bang, or whatever that is, right? As if going back in time could change anything in the kind of discussion we need to do to prove the existence of God. Keep in mind these two different causality that may be involved in our reasoning. One is causality, which is accidentally subordinated in the past. For example, I'm here because of my grandfather and my grandfather. So clearly, I'm an effect compared to their causality. But this causality is not affecting me right now. And it can go on and on and on. So my existence right now doesn't depend, if not accidentally, from them. So I don't have logically to exist because of them, and they can be infinite. So if I just go back in time to all the possible causes that are before me being here, all of them, to the Big Bang, they don't involve that there is an end in this process, and they don't even involve, logically, my existence here. Because my grandfather as a concept doesn't involve the existence. My grandfather couldn't explain its existence, as I cannot explain mine, just working on the idea, working on the concept, because no human being involves the existence. You have to be really metaphysical right now. By metaphysical means use a lot of your imagination, your logical imagination. If what you are, everything that you can say about yourself doesn't include your existence, you cannot explain your existence. You cannot be the cause of your existence. Otherwise, you'd be mortal. You would be mortal. You could give life to yourself. You could be the cause of your existence. The most striking things about everything around us is that everything exists, but nothing involves its existence as a concept. So what does make it exist? I don't know if it's clear. So if I go back in time, says Aquinas, there is no reason to assume that the creation had a beginning in time. He says it's logically consistent to say that has been always existing. Does it mean that it's not created? No, it has to be created. That's why you need to distinguish these two things. Even the eternity of creation in time wouldn't prove that it doesn't need to be created. And I know it might be difficult right now, but we need to understand this, because otherwise I'm losing my time, I'm wasting my time, and I'm wasting your time too. One second. So, two different causalities, and this is the other causality. What is the cause that is making this bottle of water stand right here, right now, in that position? My hand, right? My hand, I guess, right? And my hand means me wanting it there and whatever. But this causality is very different than my grandfather compared to me. Because my grandfather might not exist right now, and I still exist. But if I remove my hand, this bottle of water would drop. Let's call this simultaneous causality. So there are some events in this world which exists, which in order to exist require a simultaneous causality happening right now. We need a cause which is actually causing this effect right now, because if it doesn't, the effect is not there anymore. It doesn't exist. It ceases to exist. A great example is light, is colors. If I turn the lights off, you don't see me anymore. You don't see colors. It's not like you cannot see them, but they are there. They don't exist. You know, in the dark, there is no color. Color is a simultaneous effect caused by the light and our eyes. Otherwise, there is no color, right? I hate this computer. So simultaneous causality, again, is not like going back in time. That's why Aquinas says if you just look at the causes in the past, there is no reason to assume that God created creation in one particular moment in time. It might as well be created by all eternity. So Aquinas would say that the only way we know that creation had a beginning in time is through revelation. God revealed it. It's in Genesis. Otherwise, we wouldn't know it. As philosophers, we might assume that because before our grandfather, there was another grandfather, because the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, another Big Bang, I mean, who knows, right? There is no logical inconsistency in assuming an infinite series of events. Still, the point is, if the chair is existing right now, it is existing, but the chair doesn't require its existence, how can it not fall down? Right now, here, not compared to the Big Bang. Who cares about the Big Bang? This is about now. The kind of causality involved in the 5 ways of Aquinas are simultaneous. What is required for the existence, not of the Ferrari, because the Ferrari might go back in time. That's why Aquinas, when he focused on the 5th way, the way on finality, teleology, he didn't really like, in all his examples, to focus on human beings, because that's ambiguous, because part of our rationality is coming from us. But what about something that does exist right now as a Ferrari, but it's not a Ferrari, it's not artificial? For example, a beaver. Think of the beaver. The beaver is so cute and dangerous. I watched a terrible video on YouTube in which a beaver is actually killing a man. I mean, it's terrible. They can be pretty mean. But in the cartoons, they're always cute, and they're fascinating animals, as all nature is fascinating, because they build their dams, right? I love the beaver. I always use the beavers in my example, but we can in my classes. But we can use pretty much everything from nature. What is striking about the beavers is that they're extremely smart. What they do is fascinating. It took centuries from our engineering and architectural standpoint to really understand how they do what they do. They can stop the river and build their houses in a way in which even the frozen water doesn't impede them from getting in. And they cut the trees the right way so that they actually fall where they are supposed to fall. And even some birds are amazing the way they build their nests. I mean, they almost sue them. I mean, it's the striking thing is that they have no idea what they're doing. It's so rational, done by non-rational creatures. I mean, it's like a Ferrari which is just happening to be there, right? Is it possible? The beaver is much more than the Ferrari. If you try to build a beaver, build a beaver. I mean, it's going to be much more difficult than the Ferrari, right? Try to build the entire ecosystem, the way it works with the raining and the ocean, currencies. Try to do that. It's so much more difficult than the Ferrari and the space shuttle. So, but these things are rational. When we say that man is a rational being, we don't mean rational in the sense that the other things are not rational. We mean rational as the cause of rationality in its own action. So I'm rational not because the beaver is not rational. I'm rational because when I do something like a Ferrari, I'm the owner of my rationality. The beaver is rational as a slave. So when you really focus on the beaver and the Ferrari, you deduce that there is somebody like us who built the Ferrari, but with the beaver right now, who is totally rational, who built the beaver. Because it's its existence that requires to be rational. And this works for the entire nature. Think of the world and the universe as intelligible, because this is what it is. The universe is like a huge Ferrari. It's so intelligible that we can manage to know it so well that we can mold it the way we like, because it will always obey the kind of laws we can dig into and get deeper and deeper into them. So the world is intelligible. This intelligibility right now requires a cause which is not the cause that had to exist who knows where. Right now it requires some cause of this rationality which is not the beaver. because this is the main point. When you see something that exists, but in order to exist or exist in some way, requires something else, because he's not the owner of that property. At the biggest level, it's existence itself, because who can make us exist right now? Our nature cannot make ourselves existing. So what's the real difference between me and Harry Potter? Well, Harry Potter is a magician, right? So he's a wizard. But what's the difference between me, for example, and John Wayne in the movies? I mean, not John Wayne as a real character. Is that John Wayne doesn't exist, right? I mean, the character. So John Wayne is not a great example. I should think of something total. Indiana Jones as a character, as a fictional character. It might exist, but it does not. So what's the cause of this existence? It cannot be our nature. Again, if we could give existence to all our ideas, to ourselves. We are not the owner of this. We are slaves of this existence, as everything else in the world. So again, when Aquinas was focused on the 5 ways, he was trying to look at something that in this world does have some properties in the way they are or they are moving around that requires, as a matter of simultaneous causality of their beings, a cause which, by the way, has to be there, right? Because this is the point. I told you that philosophically speaking, we can reach the conclusion that God is right here with us. Why? For the same reason, because existence is to this bottle of water right now as me is to God. So if nothing that I am and the chair is and this floor and this building requires the existence, but it is existing, this existing requires a simultaneous causality, because there is nothing else that can make it exist. Right now, it's like existence is like this light right now is on. Who is holding this existence? On what? So God is present here as the cause of what is existing right now. That's the logic. I'm not mentioning any specific way right now. I'm trying to transfer to you the kind of logic behind it. So clearly, even if you take the whole creation from the Big Bang to now as something that is existing, and you try to define anything, including the Big Bang, still, who would hold it in existence? Who would create it? Why not just an idea? That's why the simultaneous causality doesn't have anything to do with going back in time. It might be that God created something that will evolve into something, and this is inside something that is already existing. So I'm not talking against evolutionary theories. I'm not even concerned about them right now. I'm just telling you that the logic of the proof for the existence of God doesn't have anything to do with historical causality. It's all about simultaneous causality, what is required for the things, for anything to exist, and to exist right now. So if God, for a moment, as a cause, stopped creating, we would all fall into nothingness right now. This is the implication. So creation is not an act that happened a long time ago. Creation from God's viewpoint, which is outside of time, is the same act, is the very same act now at the Big Bang time, whether it existed or not, and then the end of time is the same. It's just one action. He created the whole thing. He's outside time. For him, the whole thing from beginning to end is a segment of something. It's just right there. Does he know the future? Of course he knows the future. For him, there is no future. I mean, it's a segment. He's outside it. He's holding the whole thing in his hands. That's the picture you have to assume in your mind. That's why it doesn't matter at all if you're looking at it from year 2000 or Big Bang time or, a prehistoric time. It doesn't matter at all. The whole point is, does this world, the entire universe, explain its existence or not? Now, science works always through deductions from concepts. All our reasoning works with concepts. And keep in mind that our concepts are abstract. So whenever you try to deduce something about other things that happened in the past, you will never reach a point in which you can create an existence different than the one you experience right now. So the whole thing depends on what is existing right now. But you can talk about what might have been the cause 1 million years ago. It's all logical reasoning. That's why even if we reach the Big Bang, even if the Big Bang has very peculiar features, still the Big Bang as the atom would require an existence which is not giving to itself, because the concept of the Big Bang as the concept of anything else would still require the existence. So the question would still be open. Why does the Big Bang exist if it doesn't require existence? I'm closing just with, and then I'll open to questions, because I have a bunch of other things to talk about, but I'm not sure I have enough time. But there is only one thing, logically, that would require existence. Only one object would be such that its definition would require existence. Only one. And this is something that Aquinas recognized, that many other philosophers recognize, and there is a huge dispute in history about this concept. But still, at this level, is undisputed among all the philosophers who one way or another try to prove the existence of God, is God. The notion of God requires his existence. Why? Because God would involve every perfection without no limitation whatsoever. So if God didn't exist, so the idea wouldn't be perfect. I don't know if it's clear, because God plus existence would be a higher thing, right? So clearly, if I really think of God, that idea involves the existence of God, because otherwise it would be logically inconsistent. I cannot imagine God as not existing. That would be a logical mistake. That's the point. There is no logical mistake in imagining a chair as not existing, because the chair doesn't have all perfections in the world. But if God exists, it has to exist. So, I mean, if God has to exist, so if I think of God as not existent, I'm making a logical mistake. Or I have very limited notion of God, as maybe a Greek person who thinks that God is, I don't know, a big human who will come here sometimes to produce children for like Greek mythology, right? So unless I have very poor idea of God, the concept of God requires the existence. But still, that doesn't mean that we can deduce his existence his way. Why? Because we don't know God. If we had a perfect knowledge of God, of course, we could deduce his existence. But we don't have God. What we have is me, you, the chairs. So, do I still have 2-3 minutes? I can. Okay. Just to summarize and to sketch at least one of the ways more properly, I sketched in a way that is sufficient for tonight the fifth way, the way that involves the existence of God, starting with the natural teleology in nature. I mean, the way in which nature is intelligible. So when we understand nature is intelligible, it is like seeing the nature as a Ferrari or as a space shuttle. And that kind of intelligibility requires the existence of an intelligent being. Intelligent and free. That's why, and clearly who loved what he wanted to do, because when we do something, we love it. That's why he's a personal being, he's a loving being, he wanted creation. So also I mentioned other features that belong to the third and the fourth ways. Something about the contingency of the world, the fact that the world doesn't require its existence, and the properties of the beings of the world, which require a cause, a simultaneous causality. For Aquinas, I didn't mention the first of the ways, which is the most historical one, from the way that reaches God as the unmoved mover, which I'm going to do it very quickly right now, because Aquinas says it's the most evident of all. I think that it's evident for people who really know some advanced knowledge in metaphysics, but it's still kind of interesting, because it leads me to a different piece of the puzzle that Aquinas uses for the first three ways, which is the impossibility of going to an infinite process of causes in the simultaneous causality. He makes it explicit in the first, the second, and the third ways. So he says that he basically is looking at something that exists right now, movement. I mean, I'm moving, right? Everything moves, everything changes. We age, right? We study, we acquire knowledge. I'm talking about every change, philosophical change. I mean, a philosophical idea of change and movement. Now, movement is always a transition from A to B, where B is what was potential in A, right? So, since I'm potentially adult, I become adult. Since I'm potentially there, I can go there, right? So, I go, philosophically speaking, from being potentially to being in actuality, in a different point of the movement. And this goes for any kind of change, right, in the world. Now, we agree that change happens. We see that, right? But movement is peculiar because every time something moves, it requires a mover outside of itself, a different mover. Why? Because in order to reach something that I'm not yet, I cannot do it by myself, otherwise I would be already that thing. So even if I move my body doesn't move by itself. That's why we talk about me as a living being, right? My life is an inner power that until I'm alive can move my body. So my body is not actually moving itself. I'm moving my body, and myself, I cannot move my own life at the very first time. So I cannot give myself life if I'm dead, right? So every time Aquinas says the most evident, self-evident principle of movement is that every mover requires something that is moving it, because movement requires something that goes towards something that is not already there, so you need somebody else to reach the point. So if you move, the ball is potentially here, but if nobody kicks the ball will just stay where it is, right? Now, you can read a lot about this point, but it's supposed to be kind of self-evident. It's not. I mean, the history of philosophy, this has been challenged in many ways, but I need just to give you a sketch of how the proof works. So now, and again, this is the first sketch by Aristotle. So if everything that moves requires a mover, of course, we don't have to reach God, right? Because we can just go back in time, even to the Big Bang. We have movements, but remember that movements here is a simultaneous movement. So we are not talking about my grandfather. We are talking about me moving something. I mean, this movement is actually happening right now. So I need a simultaneous causality for this movement. So is it illogical to just imagine that they may be not God, but different causes, all simultaneously acting on this bottle to have it here, so that I don't need to reach God, but I can just, from movement, saying that, well, I mean, logically, it can be thousands, infinite causes. It would be logical. Why? Because if you see a train moving, you cannot imagine that it's logical to have the train without at least one engine, right? You cannot have infinite, carriages. What do you call the pieces of the train? Cars, right? You cannot have infinite cars, but not one of them with an engine, right? Because otherwise none of them would move. If you imagine that to have a lamp standing here, hanging on the ceiling, can you imagine to have infinite numbers of little rings, attaching it to the ceiling? If there is not at least one of them attached to the ceiling, you would never have the lamp hanging, as you would never have, even with infinite cars, a train moving. So the point is that you need a mover which moves all the others by his own power, not by the power of somebody else. For example, in my being alive, my first power is what we call the soul. Is the principle of life. Without the soul, I cannot move, but still my soul too doesn't explain itself. But anyway, Aquinas would say that the simultaneous process of causality needs to reach, in order to exist right now, needs to reach at least one mover which is not moved by anything. A mover that is not moved is a mover without any potentiality, just actuality. Is not something that is in movement already. No, it doesn't move. It's a mover that doesn't move, because if it moves, it's imperfect. Because again, moving is from reaching something you are not yet there, right? So God cannot have this imperfection. So Aquinas would say, if you look at the existence of movement here, and you realize what movements involves, and that in order to be actually existing right now, it needs right now a mover that moves without being moved, Aquinas would say, well, this is what we call God. Now, according to this way of God, what do we know about God? Well, we know something really important. It's a sort of negative knowledge. It's a mover that is not moved. But we know something really important. We know that there is no potentiality in God. God cannot move. And I closed with this little insight. This is why Aquinas said that creation is not a movement. You know, it's easy to think of creation as going from A to B, right? It's not. Because if creation were a movement, God had to operate on creation on something that pre-exists the movement, which is potentially something. But if creation is potentially existing, it means that it's limiting God's power to create whatever he wants. So there is nothing before creation. So when we move, we have a being which exists in a way that is potentially something else. But there is nothing before creation. So Aquinas would say, metaphorically, you can say that there is A without creation and B with creation, but it's not a movement. This is metaphorical speech, because creation is from now. B doesn't have anything to do with A. In creation, I can have a little cat here and a huge elephant here. I can have an egg and a skyscraper at the point B, because there is no connection, there is no potentiality. In movement, you cannot have the skyscraper in point B and an egg in point A. If you have a point A with an egg, you're going to have one kind of bird or whatever it is, a snake, whatever it's coming from that egg. But that egg has to be potentially the point B. It's just not able to explain itself being limited to point A if it's going to reach point B. But it has to be there somehow. Creation is nothing before that. So this explains why, well, I mean, I need to stop. I mean, there are so many implications about space-time and science fiction here, but maybe through the questions and answers, because this would be too long. Okay, thank you. Actually, you had a question. She may have a question from a long time ago.
No, I think you were talking about like the existence of a Ferrari, and it just reminded me of the teleological argument with the watch. Really
okay, sorry, answer. Okay, Wills.
Yeah, I want to ask a couple of clarifying questions. So the first one would be, there are a lot of sort of new atheistic philosophers today who use this bad metaphor of saying, well, God is just this being in the sky that we just can't see. So properly speaking, will we talk of God as a being or as something different?
Being, in a sense, just philosophers right now, the way we talk about God depends on what we see in reality. So if we see in reality just the unmoved mover, as Aristotle would see it, it might look like an impersonal being. But then if you add also the beaver to the picture, and the teleology, and the ways to know through causes, I mean the third way, the contingent, and the fourth way, the by participation, that picture is of an intelligent being who wanting to create something, is free, and is pretty much similar to what we are, because we are effects of God's too. So in sense, from looking at what we are, we can see by analogy also the way God as a cause is. but definitely is an intelligent being, and is a being who created everything, and is creating everything right now. So again, the act of creation is just one, it's the same act. So the way we are right now, God is right here as the being that is simultaneously causing our existence, making us different, just an idea.
Right. So then he wouldn't be a discrete being, but he'd rather be called properly, I think, described as being itself, existence.
It is
itself.
definitely. It's not limited by anything. So you cannot say what God. In a sense, it's interesting that when God gives His name in the Bible, is one of the most philosophical moments in the Bible. So because if God had said, "I am," and He finished, so what He was would limit His being. So anytime I say to you what I am a natural law scholar. That means that I'm not a bunch of other things. So what you are, your essence, your nature, limits your being. So anytime you are something, you're not something else, right? This is a chair, it means that this is not an elephant. So the only way in which you can see God is just limited to is, because is the fullness of being. So you cannot say anything else because it would be a limitation to God. And this is something we enrich philosophically for the very reason we were talking about. So there is no potentiality. So you cannot say, every time you say you add an essence, you say this is a chair, being a chair is limiting something else. So and God says, I am who I am. I don't know the English translation actually, but that's the only name God would give to Himself, because His name which is just open to the fullness of being. So it cannot be identified as a special object or anything like that. In a sense, more than seeing God in the sky, a better picture, even though this is kind of philosophical science fiction too, but a better picture would be to see us in Him. So in a sense, where are we? I mean, in a sense, He's everything. So in a sense, it's better to see us in Him than Him on the sky, right? Because He's definitely bigger. He's not like we are bigger and He's somewhere in the universe. I mean, the universe is nothing compared to Him. So that's the point. So if we have to use a metaphor as a picture, it's better to say that we are in His not even sky. I mean, we are in, in the little nail of His.
Just the clarification I was aiming at was that God is not a limited being.
It's not limited, right?
Many contemporary philosophers, the new atheists with Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris, some of you guys may have heard of these guys, and the God Delusion, books like that, and they all use this. What they're arguing as God is not what Thomas Aquinas would consider God. So what they're arguing against no Christian, no theist holds as being God.
To my experience in reading contemporary scientists, is that it's almost impossible to find any scientist at all with a clear understanding of at least the key metaphysical concepts involved in the problem of creation, because they keep thinking of creation as not as a simultaneous causality. They think of creation as a question of chronological order of things. They somehow think that some kind of evolution would deny the need for a first cause of everything in the simultaneous causality order. And I've never found anything really challenging in those approaches, which have been refuted by philosophy a long time ago. I mean, it's just that history keeps repeating itself in a way that I think that part of it is not bad faith. Is that today in contemporary universities there is too much fragmentation of knowledge. So some people become experts in their own little field without any knowledge of all the other fields. So pretty much they don't talk to anybody until they are very famous. They talk about everything in public. They don't even know what they're talking about. No, every famous person will end up talking about everything, right? So that's what it is. And when you start talking about everything, you're not scientific anymore. And that's what happens with Stephen Hawking. I confess, I cannot even read him anymore. I mean, it's too, philosophically speaking, is not worth reading. I mean, there is nothing in there. It's just a polemic by somebody who wants to talk about anything. It just doesn't work. So, and I humbly say that I don't understand anything about science, but enough to know when science becomes bad philosophy. I mean, that's what it is. So, a great book, for example, I read is by Penrose. Is the Emperor's New Mind. I think that's a great sketch of contemporary science. And still, when he talks about, I respect him a lot, but all he can understand in philosophy is some kind of new Platonism, which goes with the territory in mathematics, because mathematicians only work with abstract concepts, and they don't get it. They don't get that nature cannot be just numbers, but that would be a different talk. But even in very excellent scientists, who I think are very honest, you don't find very refined knowledge in philosophy. And this is a problem, I think, of contemporary universities, not just of the. But you can fix it. I mean, you can try to be always very scientific. You always need to know what you're doing and what you can say about something. Never step too much on something you don't know. Even Aristotle, when he offered the first so-called proof for existence of the soul, doesn't even call him the soul in the sense of the spiritual. The soul. He doesn't even say much about it. He just says that he's seen something that cannot be blended with the body. That's it. He doesn't say anything else. But he's following a very strict, train of reasoning. And at the end of the reasoning, he doesn't say, okay, the spiritual soul exists. He's just saying, no, there is something here which cannot be blended with the body. It cannot depend on the body. That's it. Then there are 2,500 years of philosophy trying to get deeper into it. But when you are just working in your lab and you see something maybe about the expansion of the universe, fine, just say what you are calling it. I mean, this is what I call X. I mean, where X is only what I'm seeing in this lab, is nothing else. And if I want to talk about God, you need to start studying about metaphysics and the history of philosophy. You cannot just invent yourself from the physics lab to a philosopher. This is again, I think it's a mistake of contemporary universities, and some people they have too much glory sometimes in newspapers, and they start talking about everything. That's what it is. Other questions? I think you have. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I understand that the need to prove or even understand the existence of God does not require the historical causality you're talking about. But just to play devil's advocate, let's say the Big Bang was an event. How do you explain from the other side, and this may just be my small-minded approach, that something came from absolutely nothing? How, philosophically, even something so minute, how do you say that?
So if the Big Bang did exist, I mean, what's the...
So how would you explain it if you were to try philosophically, however futilely, to actually explain that from
the Big Bang? How would I explain the Big Bang? Or
how would you explain that?
For me, the Big Bang is not a philosophical issue, so I'm not interested. So if the Big Bang existed, which I don't have any reason to object, I mean, I don't know anything about the Big Bang. So if you ask me how contemporary scientists are following a consistent reasoning from something that they see right now to the Big Bang as a theory, I have no clue. This is not my field. So, and to me, it's not a problem, because even if the Big Bang existed in a certain moment, by moment is relative, because in a sense the Big Bang would be in a moment in which the time-space moment would be kind of, messed up, not as we think of it today, right? But even if there is a moment, as a figure of speech, in which the Big Bang happened, there had to be something there that we can call the Big Bang. I mean, if you try to reach that the conclusion that before the Big Bang there is nothing, in the sense that the non-existence, okay, at that point I have a philosophical immediately objection. I mean, because you cannot reach any consistent conclusion saying that in order to explain what exists today, you have something that didn't exist at a certain time in the past. Because again, that would be creation. But creation, by definition, requires somebody who created it from nothing. Because from nothing to something, there is no transition. So that's it. How can you, if you define the Big Bang as nothing, I can tell you, well, fine, your theory is wrong, because you need to give me an argument that can go from that nothing to something, even the Big Bang at point zero.
To explain that,
I think that it shouldn't. The only thing that I found in contemporary science, I think that contemporary science only makes these arguments when they speak too much in public. Okay, God doesn't exist because of the Big Bang. I cannot believe that this is what they want to say. It's just they shift, like emotionally, from something that they're actually studying, which should make sense, to something that doesn't make any sense. And they're talking about God. So if the Big Bang is something, whatever it is, and it is the cause of everything that is right now existing in a series of events as long as you can imagine, still it is something, and it would require a simultaneous cause of its existence. So maybe they should tell you that before that God created the Big Bang. Fine, whatever. But or maybe before the Big Bang there was another Big Bang, like the ozono hole that apparently is a cycle, right? Whatever. But again, I'm not interested in the Big Bang as such. I trust science. I just don't see their arguments that can shift from those things to God. So and the few things I read, for example, by Hawkins, are not worth reading. There's nothing scientific in his statements, so they are illogical. As many logical things are in science. To me, the most striking things about science is time traveling. But anyway, that's illogical, and it's amazing that they don't see that. But if you want, I can talk about time traveling. Since I love Star Trek, the latest movies are great. So for me, the funniest thing about Star Trek movies is that it's all about time traveling, which doesn't make any sense. It's not as a science fiction issue, right? But then they mention miracles, and Spock says miracle doesn't make any sense. It's impossible. Something like that. So you're talking in a movie in which everything is impossible, and the only thing that would make logically sense becomes impossible. This is a bad science fiction. But time traveling is all about science fiction, and sorry, okay.
Just to respond to what you said, I think oftentimes from the opposing side, it's more disagreement about what nothing means. So a lot of times what you hear people say, and what I've read, in response to Aquinas' arguments, is they'll be like, oh, existence isn't necessary because it arises from the existence of math. But Aquinas would look at them and say, math is not nothing. And what caused math to arise? And at which point, there's usually oh, well, it just has to exist. And then you're it's oh, we're actually on the same kind of sides here.
Right.
So
Yeah, some people think, for example, think that void is the nothing, and that doesn't make sense. It's a linguistic ambiguity, right? But it's a linguistic ambiguity that generates amazingly odd debates about things, which of course just need clarifications. Sometimes it's terminology. So time traveling. You are curious about time traveling. So maybe I'm too archaic in my scientific vision. I'm not. But
What about the so-called rationalists who, Descartes says I think therefore I am. They're kind of redefining what existence is. So how would you respond to something like that, where it's not even on the same level talking about?
It's a different tradition of thought. It's not. I love to talk about it. It belongs to the tradition that tries to reach God starting from our mind, not from the world, which is the so-called ontological argument tradition. And Descartes is one of the first modern thinker who kind of undertook that kind of path, even though it was a kind of approach already existing even at the time of Aquinas. Aquinas is trying to criticize it at the very beginning of his analysis of the issue. So I'm not, I disagree with that argument. I disagree with the entire approach. And in the case of Descartes, I think that Descartes was a revolutionary. I think he's more famous because he said something really new at that time. But when you get really logical into Descartes, it's so irrational. I mean, the whole process Descartes is trying to build, to me, is full of gaps. It's not a consistent way to approach God, because he wants to reach God through the doubt. I mean, but again, I would love to talk about it, but it's probably too long right now. But it's a different tradition. In a sense, in the history of philosophy about the existence of God, you have these two main approaches. One is a so-called a priori, and the other one is a posteriori. It means that one starts with our idea of God, and the other one starts with our ideas in general, starts from our mind. And the other one starts from the reality existing in front of our senses. Aristotle and Aquinas would be on the a posteriori side, and Descartes would be the first modern thinker who tries to reach the existence of God, starting with our ideas. And I mentioned why I disagree with that, because you should have God in front of you as an evident, self-evident object to know his existence, even though the concept of God truly involves the existence. But Descartes tries to do something which is slightly different, which is definitely, it deserves a different talk, which I'd be glad to give, but at a different time. So,
I just wanted to say back to that Big Bang thing. If somebody wants to say it's all these nebulous gases or atoms or something coming together and blowing up and creating things, but still there's the natural laws, the law of gravity and Newton's laws and things which we're just figuring out now, which have governed all that, which have to have been...
Well, actually, that would be from the scientific viewpoint, that wouldn't make sense to them, because as I understand it, science is claiming that the more you get closer to the Big Bang or to a borderline situations like black holes, the more these kind of laws don't apply anymore in the same way. So in a sense, you have different levels in the existence of the universe. In some levels, you have some laws. At other levels, you don't have the same laws. So, and that, to me, can make sense. I mean, I don't see anything illogical about it. So again, when science does science, I bow my head and I accept it. So I agree. I know that Einstein was a revolutionary too when he says that there was a connection between speed and time. People thought he was crazy, but now it's experimental. So we know that there is a connection. That doesn't mean that time traveling is possible, but it means that he was right, and he was very much Aristotelian on that. But again, in the Big Bang, not even your idea of time and space would apply. No gravity, because there would be nothing that would attract itself with other bodies. Gravity is a relationship between two bodies, right? So there wouldn't be anything like that. So supposedly, even in the black hole, you don't reach that situation of physics. So anyway.
Consistency of the properties of all the elements, the gases or whatever.
But you keep thinking of the elements as you see them today. So they wouldn't be the same elements at that time. I mean, if some of you study science, you can add to this. But but the point is that it's not to our purpose here. It's just that this is not inconsistent with creation. That's it. I mean, science can prove that under different conditions and situations, some laws and the properties of elements don't work the same way. Fine. Why would we be? Actually, I'm surprised that people are surprised about these things, because to me creation is so spectacularly mysterious and deep that we cannot think that just one law or the way we understand the law can reveal everything to it. Clearly there is a big world that regulates the entire universe that we are still getting some glimpse into it. But clearly some things appear in a way when we look at them from a very big perspective, and they look different from other perspectives or under different circumstances. I mean, why would it be? It's not a faith issue. That's the point. I mean, there's nothing in something like that can be related to either faith or to the philosophy of the existence of God. God could have created a world in which at the very microscopic level things work in a way, and then they work a different way when you get bigger levels or you go through the years, or you have different bodies very far from one another, whatever that is. And of course, you would draw laws from what you see. So you would say, well, right, there is a law of gravity here, but you need to understand that law of gravity is just about what you are seeing right now that regulates the movement of these two bodies. You change some of the conditions, and you might have to change your name, because that's what you call the law of gravity, right? It's not the entire universe. Maybe the law of gravity is what you call the universe when you observe it from this perspective in this moment, particular time. Change perspective, change time, it changes a lot. And so, anyway, my main point is that, again, if science is very well done, it's not a challenge to good philosophy or to good theology. It's only when it shifts to, unexplored philosophical and theological fields that it becomes a problem. And all we have to do is to clarify meanings, concepts. So, yes, Mike.
Hi. So I'd like to clarify a connection between philosophy and theology. So just now you mentioned this phrase, the fullness of being. And so for me, when I hear that, I read that as a term from like French phenomenology, particularly Merleau-Ponty, who kind of goes against the Cartesian, goes against the Kantian rationalist model and says the ultimate ontological power belongs to vision. Yet in the Bible, you have things like, faith is the hope in things unseen. We walk by faith, not by sight. And so I'm curious whether you think there's a distinction between sight and seeing, and other forms of perception like touch or hearing.
I mean, you mean the supernatural side? I mean, the vision of faith. You wanted parallelism between the vision of faith and.
I don't know how to understand that. What it means that like sight could really like look like.
I mean, sight, touch, smell. I mean, these are all sentient knowledge. So these are all examples of sentient knowledge. So a sentient knowledge, they're all at the same level. Then you have intellectual knowledge, which is.
I think for Merleau-Ponty, at least, he distinguishes between the different types of sensations. So you have things like
right.
base level primordial sensation, where everything is
together.
You have in I guess southeastern metaphysics, you have this notion of the mind as a sense organ. And even within the West, you have the sight. You have different grades and different characteristics of ways of perceiving the world, and I'm wondering whether that really is one like level of understanding, or are there ways of like hearing God versus like John 10.
There are many philosophical interpretations of knowledge, and I'm not familiar with all of them. I studied Merleau-Ponty, of course, and I didn't study. I really don't think that there is something much about philosophy going on in the Eastern world until a certain point in history. We are trying to make it look like philosophy, but it's not. I mean, it's more like a way of living than an ascetical way of living. It's more like religion than philosophy. But philosophy is a rational process. It's a very rational process that involves a scientific method. So, and that was started really in Greece. I believe that that's the philosophy we should look at. And when the distinction between different levels of sentient knowledge or intellectual knowledge wouldn't be that important or relevant to this discussion, except that sentient knowledge is the only knowledge where we can grasp the existence of something. That's it. So intellectual knowledge involves an abstraction. Whatever levels you draw, the only point that is really relevant to us here is that our senses, all of them, 5 of them, even if at different levels, doesn't matter, they are the only ones that can grasp the existence. Our intellect can only talk about the essence, the nature of things, their concepts. So if we close our eyes to reality, there is no way to reach existence, because we cannot deduce existence from our intellectual knowledge. So the way to define roughly intellectual knowledge is the knowledge which involves an abstraction from real things. So you can close your eyes and think. What you think is universal in scope. So the concept of chair is not this chair. It's something that doesn't exist and that can be applied to every instance of chair in the world. The concept of dog is not the dog. The dog is only the one that is barking here and now. So there is no dog. So when you think of dog, you might think of, I don't know, give me some kind of dogs. I mean, Labrador, or maybe because you have a Labrador, or maybe because you like Labrador. Some people who watch the television show with what is the Lassie? I don't know the English dogs.
Collie.
Yeah, the collie, right? So the point is that you would think of an image coming from your sentient knowledge, because that's what your experience with dogs. But that image is not the concept. The concept of dog would work for the Labrador and the collie and whatever dog. So your mind is working with some visions that is not intellectual, is just related to your sentient knowledge, but is working with something totally abstract and universal, which is the concept. This concept, this idea, is not in the real world. Is a fictional character in our mind. It exists just here. So the only way we know the existence of things is through our external senses. And that's all I need to say. If we want to get deeper in how the external senses work or the intellectual knowledge works, that can take a long time, and many philosophers would like to draw different distinctions. But this is all that we need right now. I mean, that's it. So I don't find this in Oriental philosophy or anything like that.
I think those more examples. But I think even the distinction between analytical philosophy and philosophy as a worldview only was recent.
It is very recent, absolutely.
Just not going to for a discussion after we break. Just, are there any other questions? I was going to ask one final general clarifying question, which is a lot of Enlightenment philosophers, a lot of the founding fathers weren't Christian per se, but sort of believed in a deist God. If any of you guys took like AP Euro in high school, you probably learned about like the God who was the clockmaker. He made the clock. He set it in motion. Doesn't really have anything to do with the world anymore.
Right.
And so I was wondering if you could
the architect.
if you could sort of make a distinction between the Aquinas' demonstration or understanding of God, which undergirds the Christian understanding of God, and then the clockmaker deist conception. What's missing in the deist one compared to
It's missing. Thank you. It's a very good question, and I like to answer actually even adding something theological here, but philosophy first and then theology. That God is missing pretty much the whole picture we try to draw today, because that God is treated almost as Greek mythology, as something, as you said, who is up there in the sky somewhere. He created something and kicked it away. So he missed the whole point of a being who is actually right now creating everything and holding everything in his hands, so wanting everything and being the first mover of everything that is moving right now. Aquinas says that philosophically speaking, God is more present to me right now than I am to myself, because God is thinking every little electron in me right now, putting it together. He is making me existing right now. God, where is God? He's here, and He's somehow loving me so much that He is walking with me everywhere, keeping me into existence. Even if I do something He doesn't like, He still wants me here. He's everywhere. He is the fullness of being, and He is more involved with the world as you can imagine anything be involved with the world. There was almost a Greek mythological creature who was somewhere else in some mythological book, who didn't have anything to do with the world, which was also a sort of a self-justification for being free to do a lot of other things, independently from the presence of God in this earth. In the Christian tradition, the so-called presence of God is both a philosophical understanding, not theological, at this level, and an ascetical point too, because once I understand that God's act of creation is what it is, I know where God is so much into me, so much everywhere, that I'm walking in Him. So it's here all the time. And He has a design, He has a purpose for everything. So it's a big deal, ascetically speaking. Then, as John Paul II would say, also theologically that picture of God is terrible, because in our Christian revelation, God is the person who created the world to be a loving character of this world through incarnation. So He is the Emmanuel who wanted to be with us so much more that He became us too, which is a higher level of presence, which is the sacramental presence of God. So God now is present to us as beings, as the Creator, who is thinking about us in a way and holding us into existence and thinking of every little cell in our body and clearly hoping that we do what He created us for. But as Christians, through baptism, we actually are sacramentally one with Jesus Christ as the incarnated God, who wanting to be our brother here with us, and we are one with His mystical body in a way that is even higher than the philosophical presence. If we cannot rank them because they are part of the same picture, but this sacramental level involves a God who is the God who is walking with us in the Garden of Eden even more, because now He became us to make us like Him, so we became divine. So He's a God who made the world to make the world divine with us. So now we are not really just human, we are also divine in God. So this connection between God and the world and us is so misunderstood by that modern tradition of the big architect, so-called, that is unbelievable that people didn't see it way before. I mean, we had some recent, rediscovery of this Emmanuel, theology of God being with us. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, very well. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.